Good afternoon. We're going to call to order the July 9th, 2025 meeting of the Town of Oakland Charter Review Committee. Madam Clerk, roll call. Jennison. Chair Motley. Present. Member Cox.
Here.
Member Guys.
Here.
Member Honeycutt. Here. Member Marullo is absent. We have a quorum. Thank you, Madam Clerk. If we could entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes from the 4/21/25 meeting.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And we will move into item number 4, discussion of Article 5, election.
Elise, are you going to be handling that item? Setting it up?
Kathy will speak to that, like what we were looking at. It's actually the qualification part of it.
Yes. Article 5, Article 5, the elections. We're looking at the runoffs. And that, let me go to something prior here. Yep, the runoff elections under E. I handed out, where did it go? There we go. I received from the Orange County Supervisor of Elections Office the handout that you have on municipalities in our division. And you can see which ones have runoffs. They are really trying to do away with runoffs because they are very costly to each city and town. So we're looking at that provision there for your consideration. Also, and I think I'm probably a little, can't remember what our discussion was prior, so I'm going to lean on council to give us some information as it relates to the runoffs and the pros and cons from the standpoint of the data that's been provided to us.
Sure. And the data you're referencing from the supervisor's office, was it in the agenda packet or?
No, it was, I'm sorry.
Oh, can I grab a copy of it real
Yeah,
quick?
that'd be great.
Generally, what you're looking at under the charter currently, thank you so much, if more than 2 candidates run for a particular office, then as a result of that, no one gets an absolute majority over 50%, then you end up in a situation where a runoff election is held. If you recall from prior discussions, the timing of the runoff election set out in the charter right now is incredibly compressed in relation to the requirements of federal law for what's called the Help America Vote Act, requirements to mail out ballots overseas and having extensive periods of time prior to an election. So the deadlines that are already in the charter right now would be unachievable under federal and state law. It would end up being more than the 28 days that are set. But what ends up happening is if you end up in a situation where you have more than 2 candidates running and you have the requirement, as it is currently in the charter, that someone has to get an absolute majority, over 50% plus 1, then you end up the 2 top vote getters go and have a second round election. Having a second round election ends up delaying the results of the election. There's a cost incurred in having another election. and so on. And as indicated, it is a direction from a lot of different directions, including the supervisor's office, looking to try to encourage folks to eliminate that. I recall, and please correct me if I'm recalling incorrectly, we have not in the last many, many, many years in Oakland actually had a runoff election because we have not had a circumstance where, at bare minimum, we've not had a circumstance where 3 or more people were running and someone didn't come out with 50% plus one. So it's not like it's a very common occurrence here in any event, but the problem is it does end up being a situation that you always have to plan for if it is in our chart. So that introduces a level of uncertainty there and increased cost and delay. So to this point, relating to the elimination of runoffs is actually listed as one of the charter topics for discussion in the memo because we discussed it previously and we put together language if it was the direction of the CRC to recommend eliminating runoffs. You have language in subsection 3 of part 2 of the memo that would implement the elimination of runoffs.
I would like to add under, one moment, please. Under section 2.4 qualifications. When someone wants to qualify to run, they can either pay a qualifying fee or they can get petitions to not have to pay a fee. And the Orange County Supervisor of Elections Office is really asking cities and towns to not do the petitions anymore. I asked them for how many cities surrounding our town actually have a petition process, but I never heard back from them in time. But this process is not widely done. So we are looking to see if the petition process can be voted out and to be discussed for your consideration.
Any discussion on that matter?
As elections concern is what, that it costs them money to process that?
So I think there's a few things. So we haven't had anybody qualify through the use of petitions for a very, very long time here. It's not commonly used. It takes up 10 days of the schedule just to hold it open for the petition process. And the person, it's a little misnomer because they still have to pay for every single petition to get certified by Supervisor of Elections. And it's like 10 cents a petition. So I think what we're asking is, are petitions really necessary? Because there is also a fee waiver if somebody really cannot afford the fees. Our fees are fairly low. It's only $100 to the town and $5.99 to the state. So it's $105.99 that somebody has to pay to qualify. If that is a hardship for somebody, there's a waiver that they can request. So I think what we're asking, is it really necessary to have the petition process in the charter at all? Or if we could just go to a fee process?
Elise, you mean $599, state of Florida?
$5.99 to the state of Florida. So the total is $105.99.
At least you mentioned a waiver of the fee process. Is that something that the town has always had, or is it an alternative and to be added to the?
All jurisdictions have that in place.
I'm in favor of waiving the petitions and just going with a straight fee. And if there's an option for them, if they need a waiver, just to do that.
I'd be in agreement as well.
I'm pro-democracy and people shouldn't have to pay to run for office, but if there's an opportunity for them to waive that fee, then I'd be okay with it.
And the waiver on that is kind of tracks the state's undue burden. Yeah, it'd be a waiver for someone who's, it would be a financial imposition on them. They'd be indigent, not someone you have a lot of money and then they just don't want to pay it. So.
And one reason I bring that up is it actually just did happen in Orange County for the commissioner seat. The individual did submit petitions as a, I think they paid the fee, but they also submitted the petitions to show that they had the public support.
Yeah, so some jurisdictions require both. They require, like Windermere, for example, requires a fee and petitions. But a lot of jurisdictions just require a fee. They don't have a petition process. So that's kind of something that's been in our charter and our code for a long time that may just be a little antiquated. And it's like I said, since I've been here, I've done 3 elections and nobody has ever used the petition process. And the last time I saw that it was used was like 2006, I believe.
No further discussion. Does this require a motion for us to move forward?
This,
But I know that it's a part of your discussion in your memo, so
yeah, and this is actually, it's a good lead into that. This is a meeting where we do want to ask you all to make a number of decisions, take some votes to give us clear direction. What are we working up in a final report, if you will? So if y'all have a fully formed thought on it, I recommend a motion to say that that's one of the ones you'd want to advance forward.
or should we proceed with your memorandum and maybe motion through the way you've outlined the topics there?
We could, with respect to the matter of unless you added it, the matter of, the petition, removing the petition option is not in our memo.
Okay.
So if you wanted to take a vote on that now, I think it'd be appropriate. And if you wanted to wait and take it in line as we go through on the matter of runoffs, we could just do that then.
I'd prefer to wait until we get to that portion of the memo and then we can add the petition. into
Sounds
the
good to
section.
me.
So it can flow in succession. So I guess that means we move to agenda item 5, the memorandum from the town attorney. Oh.
That's the recommended language if it's the direction of the committee to go in that direction to eliminate runoffs, yes. Chair, for what you mentioned about procedures and so on, it may make sense.
Okay.
We'll just work on through the pieces and you take votes as we go along and give us some direction. So.
Okay.
So we're going to divide this up a little bit. Stephanie's going to go over briefly the items that we believe we've already heard kind of direction or consensus from the committee, but want to get confirmation on that. And then I'm going to be taking the section that addresses kind of outstanding issues where we haven't gotten final direction on yet, and ask you all to make some further decisions there.
Oh, all right. So moving through section 1 of this memo, first we have set forth the proposed cleanup amendment. This covers the changes that are more to deal with errors and omissions, things that we believe were simply left out during the last charter amendment process. There are a number of provisions in there, and when these provisions were previously discussed by the CRC, there seemed to be somewhat unanimous consensus that the CRC wished to move forward, but we would just like to bring these items back for a final vote to ensure that that is the direction. We can, if anyone wants to pull one of these out for specific discussion, we can do that. Otherwise, we would request a motion and a vote.
And just to break it up, break it down a little bit, you're addressing first the cleanup amendment.
Yes.
It's in this first part, if you will, it's broken up into a number of subsections. The first one is what could be grouped into a single cleanup amendment in multiple parts, because it's kind of cleaning up things all throughout the charter. The other ones are ones that are more their own discrete subjects, and so it would be our general recommendation that those be their own questions so the voters know what they're voting on. So the inquiries first to what's referenced as the proposed cleanup amendment that's on pages 1 and 2 of the memo. So
There's a section I and a section numerical 1. So the section I, Roman numeral section 1, is longer than the 2 pages, but the numeral 1 is the first 2 pages of the memo. Yes.
So my mic was off, so clarify subsection I, or section I, subsection 1, proposed cleanup amendment. Make a motion, we accept those as recommended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And we will move to subsection 2 under letter I.
Yes, thank you. Section, I suppose it would be 1, 2. This is the proposed amendment to section 2.5C that addresses filling of vacancies. The revised language that we have presented here today provides for a longer period to fill an existing vacancy. That change is going from 30 days to 90 days. We have found in our experience that it is difficult to fill a vacancy within 30 days. And so that is just to give the commission some additional time. And it also removes the provision requiring that should the commission fail to fill the vacancy within the set time frame, that the vacancy will be filled by an appointment made by the governor. Instead, the town commission would call a special election.
I move that we accept the proposed amendment, subsection 2.
Second.
Moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
I have a question. Is this how it's going to be presented to the voters on the ballot?
great question. So when we get our direction from you all, we're going to be going back and putting together the actual ballot summaries. I think we've talked about that a little bit before. The way that works is they don't have the exact charter language on the ballot. That sometimes could go on for pages and pages. You have a ballot title and a ballot summary. Ballot title is 15 words or less. The summary is 75 words or less, summarizing the chief legal effect of that charter amendment. So we're going to be coming back to you all with language to that effect for you all to take a look at and ripping it apart if it doesn't seem clear enough and doing some tweaks to it and so on.
So would these be individual votes that some portions could pass and some could not?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so that's why it's important when, whenever anyone thinks through different charter amendments, you make sure that they don't depend on each other, they're not contingent on each other, that they each would make sense on their own.
Do we have the option of adding a heading ballot or heading vote that says I accept everything?
That would
Yes
be
or no?
nice. Yeah, it doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way under the Florida Election Code. That would be fun, though.
Just to be clear, these first 4 pages can't be done under one change, cleanup.
So I will share the general advice and policy that our office in this work advance. When you group too many disparate ideas together in any sort of ballot initiative, it becomes very difficult for the voters to understand precisely what they're voting for. It's very difficult to summarize distinct legal matters. What we tend to do sometimes, if things are highly related, and you have otherwise distinct amendments, whenever we're putting together that language, we do a final review to see, hey, could we reasonably put together 2 or more of these items together in a single question in a way that would still be clear to voters? So that is when we have final direction from you all as to where we're going, that is part of our drafting process in coming up with ballot summaries, is looking, is there a reasonable way to put some of them together? Because less questions is better as well. There are a lot of competing interests here. One, you want clarity for the voters to understand what they're doing. The other, you don't want 37 questions. So I recognize the concern there. When we have that all nailed down, we're going to look and see which pieces would make sense to recommend to you all that could be put together.
And
And I'll
to
ask,
add,
I'll ask the question again. There's not an opportunity where you could say, yes, I agree to all of it? Yes or no?
No. And that's not governed by our rules here. That's governed by the Florida Election Code. 101.161 of the Florida statutes governs how referenda are presented to the public. And that would be a really cool idea. I mean it genuinely, but it's not an option.
I mean, my concern is you're going to get people that are not going to vote on this at all, and then the few that are against it are going to vote, and you're going to lose in the vote because everybody, I'm fine with it, but I'm not going to read through all that.
Sure. And that's why I'm, as I indicated, we recognize the value in having a discrete set of questions, having it be shorter rather than longer. So these are kind of 2 competing interests in that militate in different directions. So we'll be keeping a keen eye on that to see what we can shorten up.
I will add, as to the subsection 1.1, the cleanup amendment that has been presented all in one subsection together, that is one that we do feel at this point we can make the call that it would be able to go on the ballot as one question, because the entire intent of that amendment would be to clean up typographical errors and omissions rather than make policy changes. Exactly. All right, moving on to subsection 1.3. This is a proposed amendment to section 3.4, acting town manager. The basis for this provision is that it appears that during the last charter review process, some of the language simply got cut out and didn't make it into the charter. But the language that did make it into the charter, we noticed, is very consistent with what we would call sort of standard charter terms that you see in municipalities all around the state. And so the proposed amendment simply makes the town's charter provision conform to that standard provision.
I make a motion to accept subsection 3 as presented.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries.
All right, moving on in subsection 4, we have a proposed amendment to section 4.1C governing quorum and voting. The basis for this proposed amendment is that the language currently in the charter does not provide for voting procedures in cases where a commission member is absent from voting for reasons other than a required abstention pursuant to state law. And so there are sort of some gaps that are left by this language. For example, if a commission member simply were absent. And so the intent of this amendment would be to have a uniform voting procedure that would apply regardless of the reason why a commissioner is not voting.
By the way, to discussion we've been having previously, this might be an example of one I might be able to squeeze in with appropriate language, for example, with the cleanup amendment. But it's very difficult to come up with what you can squeeze in together when until you have all the pieces to work with.
I make a motion, we accept subsection 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right, moving on to subsection 5, we have a proposed amendment to section 6.1, setting forth the procedure to amend the charter. This proposed amendment removes the language in subsection B of section 6.1, and that language provides that if conflicting amendments are adopted at the same election, the one receiving the greatest number of affirmative votes shall prevail to the extent of such conflict. There really shouldn't be an instance in which conflicting amendments are placed on the ballot. And so we thought that it would be beneficial to remove that language.
And just to reiterate what I had mentioned at the last meeting when we discussed this, this is kind of unheard of across election law generally, and I'll put it this way, it's not the type of idea that should be normalized because it's at bare minimum lead to wild voter confusion. They would have no idea what the effect of their votes on various things would be. And so this is one of those instances where our office has a recommendation that should probably be removed.
We'd hopefully not present conflicting amendments for review.
I make a motion, we accept subsection 5.
Second.
Moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion will carry. And I believe we move into subsection 2, Roman numeral 2, charter topics for discussion.
So thank you very much, Chair. As I mentioned, I'm going to be taking us through this piece. Here we've, other than the charter topic that staff just brought up about removing the petition option, this is a summary of the charter topics that have come up from the CRC, have been discussed, looked at either at length or to some degree, but we didn't have clear and final direction from the CRC on it. So I wanted to move through each of these topics and request that you all take some votes to give us some direction as to where we'll be going. The first topic that we have is the topic of imposing term limits. At your last meeting back in April, the CRC considered a potential charter amendment to adopt term limits, and data and information relating to municipal term limits within Orange County were provided from information that was gathered from the Orange County Supervisor of Elections Office. So the direction or vote we would be looking for is whether or not the CRC would be proceeding forward with recommending the imposition of term limits.
Is that a topic in general, or is it specific to a particular term limit and a number of the details of that, in other words?
If there is an inclination to proceed with term limits, yes, I would recommend that discussion would ensue in getting into the particulars of what those would be. I would suggest a threshold question would be whether there is an inclination to do so in any event. But if there is a direction to do so, getting into the particulars would be something we would ask for.
The minutes aren't real clear to me, but I thought we had a conversation about this and I thought we were leaning against it. So,
I think it was probably the meeting prior to the last that we had the major discussion with regard to term limits. And I think based on the way that the charter was written and my recollection, we were leaning against that due to the staggering and the lack of participation in the votership here. I could be wrong, but
that's what I remember too.
And by the way, we didn't want to make any assumptions. We made some assumptions as to what we heard, positively with regard to things, thus that list we just went through. With regard to anything else, in the absence of some firm direction, we just wanted to make sure we were bringing in front of you so we could get clear direction from. So if that is the inclination of the CRC, I suggest a vote would be in order, and then we know what's left on the list and what's not left on the list.
I want to be on record, though, as saying I think these are opinions and not a lot of objective data that we're going on as far, when there is a need. I think it was clear in the last election that there are people that will step up when there is an opportunity that avails itself or when something important is going on. So I would be in favor 2 terms of 4 years and to continue with the staggered voting of years. So it would be 2 commissioners at a time.
As you discuss this, I would like to add some information simply for you to think about during your discussion. If term limits were to be adopted in the Town of Oakland Charter, I want to clarify that the term limits would affect all commissioners equally, regardless of how long they have served on the commission. So the newer commissioners wouldn't have a longer term than the ones who have been there for many years. They would all start with a fresh clock. And so that means that they would all, I presume, term out at the same time, unless there was some sort of staggering built into the language.
Staggering would be built in along the same lines as the staggering we have currently within the charter.
But that 8-year limit would still apply regardless of whether a commissioner has been on the commission, currently today for 1 year or for 10 years.
Well, let me offer this thought. There are, because I've looked extensively on this very topic, there are exceedingly few examples throughout the state of Florida of what we would call retroactive term limits. Okay, term limits that would look into the past as opposed to being prospective, starting with the next election term limits. Your terms start counting and so on. There has been substantial speculation in the field of election law that there are some constitutional problems with retroactive term limits. Not saying they don't exist in like 1 or 2 cities out of the 411, because I have come across 1 or 2, but the uniform way they tend to be implemented throughout the state is prospectively to avoid any potential constitutional challenges. So just throwing that out there.
And based on my review of the minutes where we did have a discussion with regard to term limits and districting, more importantly, there was some data that we were receiving from other municipalities, and I don't recall where we stood with what that data was. And I don't remember who was, whether it was supervisor or it was your office that was going to provide us some guidance as to what other Seminole municipalities are doing with regard to that issue.
I can go look. I thought we handed something out, but let me go look and see if I can find that, okay?
Our firm did provide a memo that was, I believe, part of the April 21st agenda, and it listed number of municipalities. I apologize, I'm looking for that agenda. I believe actually it was on the April 7th agenda. Yes. It's a memo from our office dated April 1st, 2025. And, okay. It lists voting districts and term limits for a number of municipalities that we had identified that are around the same size as Oakland.
Wasn't there a situation in Belle Isle where they weren't able to fill a position?
There were 2 vacancies in Belle Isle. I've seen that those have both been filled because I've just been kind of, since we discussed that, keeping an eye on that. But they did have 2 open seats.
And just to clarify, the last election where we had several people put their name in, it was after the election when nobody put their name in to begin with, and they were basically looking to be appointed into the position, not actually run for the office.
Yes, that is what happened.
I do have some additional information I did get from the Florida League of Cities that I can hand out as well that talks about, it was really for the compensation part, but it has term limits on there. It doesn't say though, if they do have term limits, what those term limits are, but I can provide that as well.
And we've seen this before too, correct? Yeah, because there was only 4 out of the whole list that had term limits listed. Well, if there's no motion on the floor, I'd like to make a motion that we not consider term limits as part of the town charter.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yes.
And 1 opposed.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the next item, and that is, you all briefly mentioned it and have some information before you concerning some of that. That was the question of adopting or establishing voting districts within the town of Oakland. As indicated, some information provided to the committee, and you all had previously discussed the matter. And so we were looking for an action to give us some direction as to whether or not the establishment of voting districts would be subject to further consideration.
Again, if my memory is correct, we discussed this, and after lengthy discussion about it, we felt that it wouldn't be a situation we wanted to apply to Oakland. So any other thoughts? If otherwise, I'll put a motion on the floor.
I second the motion.
And just to clarify, the motion would be to not have voting districts.
I'm sorry, repeat the motion.
The motion would be to not introduce voting districts into the town of Oakland.
Any discussion? Having none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Moving on to the next item, this is one of the items we were discussing earlier in the meeting. This relates to runoff elections. As I discussed previously, it has not been something that's actually come up in the last many elections in Oakland, but it is something that always has to be planned for. And as I believe we recommended, the recommended that if it was the inclination to just eliminate runoff elections, this would be appropriate language to accomplish that. If there was a desire to retain runoff elections, we did have a recommendation from the Supervisor of Elections Office to make modifications to this, to move out the timeline substantially on the runoff elections, so that they could be accommodated under current federal and state law. So we would look for some action from the CRC as the first matter to indicate whether or not you all would recommend the removal of runoff elections.
And I think I would request just some additional clarification from you as it relates to the way the charter stands now and the recommendation received, so that we can have an understanding of where we are and what the recommendation would be, should that be something we adopt.
Sure. So, so from a pure policy standpoint, our office doesn't have a recommendation on this one. It is a generally considered thought that runoff elections, particularly when you're in a situation where you have a supervisor of elections administering those elections as they should be in interaction with federal law and having to stretch out for a very long period of time, that there can be, it can be considered time consuming. That's generally a concern that is raised concerning it, but our office, as a legal matter, doesn't have a hard recommendation on it. But if it is the inclination of the CRC to recommend removal of runoff elections, the effect of it would be this. When you have an election, okay, nothing changes if you have two candidates, all right? You have two candidates, both run, somebody's going to get over 50% plus one, all right? You have 3 or more candidates, there is a non-zero chance that you'll end up with someone's going to get 49, and then someone is going to get 27, and someone's going to get 22. I think that adds up right. Somewhere around there. You're going to end up with, you can end up with situations where no one gets over 50%, okay? But what the language before you would do is change it to simply be the way that other general elections work in Florida. And that is whoever gets the most votes wins. That's when you have for example, your election in November for state representative, it's whoever gets the most votes wins. And that's what this would be in this instance.
So it becomes a plurality versus a majority.
Precisely. Try to stay away from the technical terms, but that is the precise, correct technical term.
And to throw another kind of question in here that I'm not even sure if I support it or not, but what, is there any position on ranked choice voting?
Ranked choice voting is illegal.
That would answer the question.
I actually get that question a fair bit, but it is, it's prohibited under Florida election law.
I would like to add to this conversation that the cost savings, and Gabby our finance director, can correct me on this, but I believe each election costs $10,000. So a runoff is no different. We have to start the process all over again, and it's another $10,000. And this is why we're asking you to consider this.
And more importantly, the people have to come back to the ballot.
And turnout at runoff elections, in my observation, tends to be substantially lower than at the initial election, regardless of how those that timing works out. I'll give you all just a little historical contrast, by the way. It's been a trend over the decades to remove runoffs, and it had been a trend, if you go into the past, that they had more runoffs. For good or bad, elections used to be a lot easier. Elections used to be just a single day, and folks would just troop on down somewhere and they'd just check a piece of paper, and it was all nice and easy and whatever. For primarily good reasons, elections are much more complicated. Compliance with all these things is much more robust, and as a result, putting on election after election after election becomes much more difficult than it was, say, 40 years ago.
If you wanted to cover the commencement of terms, and I think we could do a motion to cover the whole section 3 runoff elections.
So what might be easiest, just for the record, is just to have clear direction on this one. That this, things related to elections may very well be something I will try aggressively to try to combine together. You know what I'm saying? So for the purposes of combining things into questions that would make sense for the public, we don't need those in a single motion.
And to clarify as well, the language that we've presented here, the strike through and underline language, we would not recommend that you, for example, choose to recommend that the subsection E gets redlined, but then that subsection G gets left alone as it is. These subsection E and subsection G red lines really work together. And so if this is not the direction that the CRC wishes to go, then we would alternatively recommend changing the language to provide for a 120-day. And so that's sort of the choice here is should we, does the CRC recommend eliminating runoffs, or does the CRC recommend extending the time period for runoffs?
Yeah. And by the way, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question here. The change down here in that subsection that begins commencement of terms, that's part of the language change that would implement the elimination of runoff elections. It's just there are scattered references to runoff elections stuck in different parts of that whole thing, and so we got to rip out all those little pieces. So that's what that change is implementing there.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the language outlined in section 3 of runoff elections for the red line sections down through basically to section 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. And this would lead us now into the petition issue, I believe.
We could discuss it now. We are still in the election period, or in kind of in election topics here. We've got one other election-related topic on the sheet here. Can I address that one quickly
Yep.
first, and then we'll
Yep, you got it.
that, just so we can, when we get to the end of kind of the election concept, we can go back to that. So this one was this charter amendment topic related to the timing of elections. At your April 21st meeting, there was consideration, discussion of a potential charter amendment to have town elections, when possible, take place concurrently with the general election. Currently, and I apologize, I did know this, but it's gone out of my head. When do we have our elections right now? March, yeah. And this, trying to remember if the representative for the supervisor indicated they had a recommendation or preference.
He recommended not to move them.
Okay, that's right. They're trying to keep municipal elections centered in March. Is that correct? Yeah. This is a common matter of discussion and debate in municipal CRCs, because the two things you have balanced are you've got your own election date where folks are focused on, this is the city election, this is the town election, this is the municipal election, that's the time for it. And then the counter is, well, if we put it on the November election in even numbered years, we're going to have more voters, which is a fair argument. But it's also going to be one of 50 things on the ballot. So I think that was a little bit of what you all discussed before. On this one in particular, the town attorney's office has no recommendation one way or the other on it. It's just a topic that had come up. And as you heard, the supervisor's office, and I believe it was Bill Cows's recommendation as well previously, it's the recommendation of the supervisor's office trying to concentrate all the municipalities on that March date. Most of them are in March in Orange County.
And based on my recollection, with the alignment of the timing, we were in agreement to leave it in the March timeframe versus moving to the general election. That way we were focusing more on the municipality aspect versus the greater gamut.
Yeah, I do understand that. I just feel like it was something that I kind of brought up, and I still feel strongly that it should all be done at the same time, just from a voter standpoint, but I'm willing to do whatever I need to do.
I would make the motion to allow the timing of elections to remain in the March cycle for the town of Oakland.
I second.
Any further discussion?
Is there any monetary? Kathy, do you know that?
There is. So I believe the Supervisor of Elections Office said if we were to move them and combine them, because the ballot gets longer, it goes double-sided, you're in, larger paper, that it would be more costly to do it in November than to leave it in March.
I apologize for a little procedural bit here, but I've been reminded that the norm here in Oakland is that the chairs don't motions. I say norm, by the way, because folks sometimes think that's compelled by Robert's Rules of Order. It's actually not. Robert's Rules of Order for small meetings doesn't compel that, but it is the norm in Oakland, and it's all flashing back to me now. So I was going to
Taken.
recommend that if the seconder wanted to make the motion, then
It's the first time I've done it.
Yeah, no,
I've been holding my peace.
You are ready.
Looks like a mayor in training.
I make the motion to strike any discussion of moving the elections.
Second that.
Moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
And now, before we move on out of elections, probably be an appropriate time to get some direction. Moving back to the item that staff brought up concerning section 2.4, and that was relating to eliminating the petition alternative for qualification. As staff has indicated to you, it's not been used in many years in Oakland. And it does have implications for the timing of noticing elections and so on. It consumes a whole part of the calendar, if you will, for that period of time. And if that provision were eliminated, that would shorten that up on the election calendar for implementation.
I'll make a motion to eliminate the petition option.
Second.
As long as the provision is there for waiving the fee.
I think that's in the code.
Yeah, it would. I believe it's in the code. The concept is also compelled by a lot of federal case law. So you've got to do it one way or the other if someone is indigent. But I think we have it codified somewhere.
Okay, moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
We will bring back some language on that amendment at the next meeting.
And moving on to the last two items in this memo, the next one's number 5, compensation of elected officials. This is an item that or matter that was discussed at your April 21st meeting. It was discuss whether to make adjustments to raise the compensation for town elected officials. And that's about as much as I can recall. I think that's this information.
Yes, and I also have a memo. It's actually not in the only reference to it in the charter is that it says that the annual salary is determined by ordinance. So it's actually in the code with a reference to it in the charter, but I have some background information for everyone.
just to clarify, it currently says it's be decided by ordinance?
As you're considering this, I will note again, because we've had discussions previously about what are the differences between having a provision in the town's code of ordinances and having a provision in the charter. If under the current language, where the charter authorizes the commission to set the rate of compensation by ordinance, what would be required to change the amount of compensation would be for the town commission to adopt another ordinance, and that requires a first reading and a second reading. If this is moved into the charter, in other words, if the charter were to specify a specific salary or compensation amount, then we would be required to go through another referendum and have the voters approve that change. As for your consideration as you think about this.
Fine, leaving it the way it is. Do it by word. I'll second it. Oh, sure. Sure, I'll make a motion. And that would be to leave it per ordinance.
I'll second.
Moved in second, all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion will carry.
Thank you. And the last topic, I think, was more directed at this point just to receiving clarification or some information concerning the debt limitations that are set forth in section 4.11 of the charter. Does the charter currently specifies without elector approval, the aggregate amount of bonds or other evidence of indebtedness shall not exceed 2% assessed valuation of taxable property within the town. However, there are some exclusions. Revenue bonds related to utility enterprise funds supported by utility enterprise revenues, short-term notes that mature before the close of the next fiscal year. So very short-term borrowing there. Existing debt related to the refunding of the charter school, and then emergency appropriations. So I believe that we just brought this item up because this item had been discussed previously, and I believe Finance Director is here to provide a little information about where we sit right now in the town.
Hello. I have a town debt schedule here. It, the top of it kind of just gives a little bit of an overview, gives totals based on the 2%. And then the bottom part, and then all of the other pages actually outline all of the town debt. So currently, the only thing that doesn't count towards the town 2% is the USDA bond that we received in 1991, which is only about 200,000. It has reduced to about 80,000. Anything else that was prior to the ordinance in 2013 has either been paid off or has been refinanced into the town center bond that was issued, I believe, in 2016. So everything is kind of outlined for you. So we currently have about $9 million in debt. It comes out to be about $1 million, $1.1 million with interest every single fiscal year. Almost $1 million comes out of general fund, 165 comes out of water fund. I've laid out there that it's about 8% currently of the fiscal year that we're about to enter, and then 5.2 for the water fund. Water fund is 7 million, but only 3% is operating. The rest of it is grants. So that's not counted towards the debt payments because it's grant money. So if you have any questions, just let me know, but it's all laid out there for you.
And from a state a historical perspective, the town debt has not exceeded 2% at any point.
It's gone a little close, which is why we had to refinance at one point. But the 2%, not really. So if you look at it currently, 2% of our current budget is 16 million. That's a lot of money. Granted, 9 million, according to our previous auditor, is a lot of debt for a tiny little town. So, no, we haven't exceeded the 2%, but we have gotten close at some points. So, according historically.
I'm not a numbers guru, so I'm gonna defer to any additional discussion from the other members of the CRC.
I will say the 2%, currently being, 16 million going to 18 million, it is high. Our budget was fairly low in the past. It just started booming within the last 5 to 6 years with all of the growth. So I could get you those numbers. I would just have to go back and grab those for you.
So is the feeling that the 2% number in the charter is too high?
I don't think it's too high, to me, but I don't know what the attorneys will do.
The one thing I would offer is, just speaking from past experience, in local government through 2008, 2009 through 2010, numbers that go up can in fact come down, on, assess valuations, because this is tied. I know I heard you mention budgets and they have some correlation, but these numbers are, it's 2% of actual taxable value, right? Yeah, okay, all right, very good. I just mentioned this to someone else today, just as an example. You saw in cities and counties throughout the state, back in like, what was it, 2010 or 11 or what have you, Orange County had to lay off, I think, 40% of their staff when valuation started crashing through the floor. And so these valuations, if we have a market downturn, could come down substantially. Just a thought to keep in mind. So our total debt right now, regardless of whether it's exempt or not, is about 9 million.
Yes. Now that's total loans, whether it's been reduced or not. Currently is totals 9 million.
That's total outstanding principal
Correct.
on all of them.
So just to clarify, this 2% is of the actual value or the assessed value with homestead counted?
I read it as taxable property value, so what our ad valorem is based on. So yes, homestead.
It's assessed value.
Number we have multiplier ad valorem against is the same number we're going to multiply the 2%.
Correct.
So I think, Kurt, the previous discussion was, does the 2% need to be in there or not? It was added in 2015. I think that was this discussion, not if it needed to be changed, but that can also be a discussion if you wish.
Yeah, that was my only thought, was that if we're going to change a number, would be change anything would be to change the number. And I understand your point about values potentially coming down and people being laid off, but that may not have been a bad thing either. When you don't have the income to incur more debt, because you're talking about twice, you made the comment that we've been told that having $9 million in debt for such a small town is a pretty big number. And we're talking about a 50% increase in that before we actually get to the debt limit.
I will say some of it is dropping off. The the school bond will be dropping off in 2027, which that was a huge amount. I mean, there's 2 million left. That's a huge chunk that comes out. It's about a almost $600,000 annual payment that we make. So that's dropping off. The refinancing of the HVAC for collateral and the dehumidifiers and like additional work that will be dropping off next fiscal year. Some of it will be coming off in 2032, which is in just a few years. So a lot of this debt will be dropping off. Hopefully we don't accumulate any more debt, right? That's the goal. But in order to fund certain things in the town that we can't fund through operating, debt is where it's at. And unfortunately, we are, hitting our 2% right now. So we do need to pay this off. So if you're looking to reduce it, I will say the town cannot pay for certain items out of its operating income currently. We can look for grants, but those do take some time. So please take that into consideration.
But if we dropped it to 1.5%, then that number becomes 14.5 million. That's still above the 9 million, which you just said several things on that is going to drop off. So that buffer is going to become even bigger.
Yes. To give some perspective, the water plant treatment will be costing about $6 million if we cannot get grants for that, we'll have to fund that. We're already at 9, and that's looking prior to 2032 before any of this drops. So, we may not have enough debt available within the 2% or the 1.5% to be able to fund that unless the electors vote to go above that, whatever you all decide. So just plain devil's advocate here.
I don't know that I'm inclined to support changing the 2%, but I think the discussion is whether the 2% should be in the ordinance or not. And I think it's a good measure to have in the ordinance so that we're being accountable for what our debt and our acquisitions are. So that's just going to be my inclination, is not to alter the percentage or remove it.
And don't get my questions as I'm supporting it either. I'm just trying to clarify it and understand it. What I would like to do is, there's a lot of information here that we've been kind of waiting on and hadn't seen. Is there a chance we could maybe table this one and have some discussion with some folks? Because the folks that did the last charter review clearly had put a lot of thought into this. I looked at some of their minutes from their meetings. And there was a lot of discussion about this, whereas we really haven't talked about it. So to mess with it concerns me, but it also, here 9 million and we have it, we're looking at an $18 million limit. That is a pretty big check to be potentially rating against the residents of Oakland if it's not necessary. So I just would personally like to, maybe when we convene next time, to talk about this.
I'm agreeable to that.
I support that.
And thank you for putting this together, because this has got a lot of information in here and will definitely generate. So
Of course.
is there any rules about us getting with her about specifics of it offline, or how's that work from the Sunshine Rules?
You can talk to her individually, just not 2 or more of you.
At the same time. Chair, committee members, thank you very much. That was everything we wanted to cover here. I think with that one item, with a little bit more review with regard to everything else, we've gotten clear direction on everything. We are going to be going ahead and for your next meeting, putting together what will be a draft of both charter and ballot language, and a draft final report from the committee, pending, of course, any addressing of that last matter there for any potential addition in there. But we want to move you all in the direction so you can start having a final product to have worked up. So we will make that happen and get it to you.
And just for your comfort, when you're writing this up for next meeting, I'm leaning towards not changing it. And I don't think, I sense anybody else was willing to change it. So unless there's a compelling argument, change it, then probably we'll just go.
And two things to keep in mind on that, actually. One is, remember that debt is subject to market forces at some point if the town or any municipality wanted to borrow way more than it could sustain, nobody's going to want to give them money. So I have seen cities be told, nah, we're not going to finance that because they look at, and I'm not saying town of Oakland is not in that situation right now. I'm just saying there are market feedback loops on municipalities getting themselves into too much debt. Another thing to keep in mind, remember, is ultimately, even within these thresholds here, it's not automatic that staff can just run out and borrow many more millions of dollars. It comes before the town commission for them to make a decision about that.
That was my question is, what is the process for incurring new debt within the town? Is it an ordinance that goes read twice and similar like they do for?
Yeah, incurring debt is typically done by bond resolution, and there's a lot of work and process going into that beforehand. It's not the type of thing that would just pop up on a random agenda without a whole lot of work beforehand, because there is work in either securing a financing source, whether that is for water and wastewater, state revolving fund loans or USDA loans, or for anything else. Either going through the process of doing a borrowing from a bank, which is technically still a bond, or going out on the open market for bonds. It's not we just think it up one night and borrow money. There's a lot of paperwork for governments to do that, and there'll be a lot of lead time for people to know that there's going to be more debt.
And it involves a commission vote and public comment.
That's exactly right. And actually, one additional thing to keep in mind, whenever you have a municipality incurring debt that pledges what's called the full faith and credit of the municipality, and that debt is going to be longer than a 2-year period, under the Florida Constitution, it has to go on the ballot. So big borrowings that a municipality will be doing that the taxpayers are going to be directly on the hook for, Florida law already requires that those go on the ballot. We had one a couple years ago actually we just had one in Maitland just last year for their new library. We had one famously or infamously in Winter Park a number of years ago for their new library. The Winter Park one was controversial. But both of those involved debt that had to actually go on the ballot pursuant to that state constitutional provision. So the ability of a municipality to borrow against the general fund, to borrow against the full faith and credit, against ad valorem taxes, is very constrained, such that it generally has to go on a ballot anyways. Much more often, the debt you end up having is debt that is secured by, for example, water and wastewater fund revenues.
And I will add to that, just to elaborate upon some additional safeguards that apply to borrowing. There is a saying among local government attorneys that you can't mortgage town hall. And so municipalities are not allowed to go out and incur debt by placing mortgage on their critical infrastructure and property or items that the town really cannot survive without. So there should never be any scenario where, the town is saying, we can't pay back our mortgage on town hall and we're going to be kicked out of our own property.
That's all we have.
Okay. If there's no additional comment from the committee, then we will look to public comment. We actually have someone other than a committee member here today. Okay. And Right. Okay, so moving forward with our discussion items for the next meeting, I think Attorney Bello has indicated that we will receive the draft ballot summaries with the title and summaries based on the votes that were taken today and the recommendations voted on. And then we will have some additional discussion as it relates to the debt limitation. And so if there's any information that we may need the town to provide us to have that discussion, we can reach out to them directly. Having no other business or any other comments, I believe we can move to adjourn at 5:18.